crucial in this. That's good. It'll be interesting to see how she answers your question.
I kind of love that. I will be honest. I'm very much into that.
Members of Literary and Scientific Society, I welcome you to our annual Stormont Mixer held at the Parliament buildings in the Senate chamber. We are here to discuss a very important debate, one that could be central to democracy, which is why it is very fitting we are in Stormont at the moment. The motion of the debate is this House would vote. We have very exciting speakers, some of whom are maidens, some of whom are incredibly experienced, to debate today. So, without further ado, for such an exciting motion, I would like to get the vote of prior opinion. So this is your opportunity to tell us what your opinion of the motion is going into the debate. So, can I have all those on the proposition for this House would vote, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. Yep. And quite paradoxically, can I have all those who are on the opposition for this House would vote, please? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. 3 for the opposition. And finally, can we have all those who would like to abstain from the motion, please? Mr. Secretary, can I have the vote of prior opinion, please?
Yes. With 13 propositions, 3 oppositions and 0 abstentions, proposition carried.
Yep. So, before we get started, just a rundown of the rules for today's debate. So, speakers will have 7 minutes to deliver their speech. We'll going from proposition to opposition, taking it in turns. The first minute of your speech and the last minute of your speech is protected time, which means during the 5 minutes in between, members of the House may offer a POI. You do this by raising your hand and shouting on that point of information, or POI, to which it is then to the Speaker's discretion as to whether they accept your POI or they decline. Once giving your POI, you should keep it to 15 seconds maximum. Also, for a POI, you cannot offer a POI after a POI has been taken until 15 seconds have passed, or else that is barracking. Don't worry, I have my gavel to keep you right. Also, keep your POIs nice and short and respectful and straight to the point. As indicated by the bell, for your first minute and last minute of protected time, and then the bell shall ring again to tell speakers when their 7 minutes are complete. So, without further ado, I am pleased to welcome our sponsor, Peter Martin, MLA, to open for the proposition.
Thanks very much, Daniel. You're all very welcome in Parliament buildings. I don't really have a speech because one of your members sent me some points about 11 minutes ago, so sort of forgive me for that. And when I first heard that there's going to be a debate today, I was very interested to hear what that debate was, and I got a WhatsApp, and it just said, this House would vote. And I got back to Grant and I said, you've only sent me half a sentence. What do we actually... And he said, no, that's it. This House would vote. So I had to have that explained to me, actually, what the context of it all is. But voting is incredibly important. And voting changes a whole range of things. And the starting point probably is the sacrifice that was made to provide people with a vote. And we go back to the last century where we had significant world wars of people from all faiths and none, all nationalities and none, opposing, certainly in the case of World War II, a Nazi dictator who really wanted to force their will, not just on us, but in all of Europe. So people had to go and actually fight and die to preserve the privilege that we have today to vote in the first place. And the same happened for women who only got to vote in the last century as well. By not vote, what happens if you don't vote? Well, it's kind of like abdication. Elie Wiesel, I'm not sure that's actually right, Jack, probably Wiesenthal, I think, famously said that neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. So, if you don't vote, what is the implication? Well, you just don't you don't have a say. And I had a friend who's a cop, and for years, I'll have to give him a fake name now, called Barry. And Barry didn't vote, and he said, that's pointless, This is well before I got involved. That's pointless. There's no need, what's it going to actually do? And the more we had conversations together, the more he actually realised it does have a purpose. And I've been in elections where it's come down, certainly one of them came down to something like 3.5 votes between getting elected and non getting elected. That was in a council election for a Hollywood ward a number of years ago. Just 3 votes. Or you look at Fermanagh South Tyrone, where the margin, I think, was maybe 5. I'm sure somebody might tell me if there's anyone from Fermanagh South Tyrone for a Westminster election. So, in that regard, every single vote counts, and it gives you a say in what the government effectively looks like. And I'll rest on that point. On that point,
does the vote really count if the party you vote for don't implement their manifesto pledges which you voted for them all?
Yeah, that is a great question. In effect, if you voted for a party and then they don't implement what they said they would, then you vote for someone else. And actually, we find that in Westminster elections, lots of people, that sort of red wedge that we see down the middle of England. These people used to be either Conservative or Tory voters, and they now shift based on a whole range of things. So, if the party that you voted for don't actually deliver what's in the manifesto or what they're saying to do, you vote for somebody else, probably the opposite next time round, just to give them a bloody nose. And we've seen that we've seen that sort of demographic shift. In UK politics in terms of post-Brexit, and we saw that Boris Johnson just simply lied for a living and eventually got voted out because of that, and the Tories got really, really tanked, and now we have a Labour government. And so essentially the power vote, it is powerful, and we've seen that as well in Northern Ireland without making any hardcore political points. Somebody has changed face not to make them, but I try not to be too political in this sort of context. The vote last week on Irish language, for example, in Belfast City Council, whenever I was your age, Belfast City Council was dominated by unionists. Sammy Wilson, one of my colleagues, was probably holding up a sign outside that said "Ulster says no" back in the day. And it's changed dramatically. So when you have something like Irish language comes forward, and the vote is whatever it was, I think it was, somebody's going to know this, aren't they? 17 to 43 or something like that. It shows the power of a shift. Now, taking that one example, if there's people who really want Irish language on their street signs or really want Irish language on their leisure centres, then what do? You go out and vote. You go and vote for someone, a party that enshrines whatever that particular thing is, and then you get more councillors. And then when a vote comes up, you win the vote, and you, in this case, to use that as an example, get Irish language. So that's the power of the vote. It also gives legitimacy to people like me to stand up in the chamber, although I wasn't actually voted in. I'm just a co-optee. I face a judgment of the electorate in about 18 months. But, it gives us the legitimacy to stand up and represent the views of the party and the mandate that we actually have, and whatever that actually looks like. I certainly respect people who decide not to vote. That's completely legitimate as well. There's no issue with people not voting, but it doesn't give you a say in the democracy. And ultimately, that is what you want. Yes?
In first past the post, where essentially everyone is subjected to the will of the plurality, Labour got 40% last time. Does anyone really matter? At the end of the day, my vote is essentially invalidated if I'm not one of those 40%. My will is subjected to theirs.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so, in terms of how that vote counts, I think your point is if you're in a massive Conservative, majority and you want to vote Labour, it's not going to make any difference. Yeah. Well, that's absolutely fine. I thought that was a really good point. Good point, Peter. In essence, in terms of how, who's elected, no, it doesn't. Okay, absolutely fine. It doesn't. But equally, what they'll do is at the end of the election, they're going to count up all the votes. And somebody's going to have a line to take in a document somewhere whenever they're sent out to the press corps. They're going to say, well, actually, the percentage of our vote increased. So your vote did count in press lines that are going to be talked about during the election on TV screens across the... So it's not. It may not elect the person you want, but it certainly will count in terms of lines that go out and the aftermath of the election itself. So I assume I don't get one more minute for a question? No, they're nodding at me. No, we get it in there. So look, I would really encourage you to make your vote count today. See what I did there? And vote on this side of the House. I still haven't lost a debate yet, and this is number 4 for me, and that's the end of me. Thank you very much.
That very fine speech. I would now like to call Hugh to the podium to open for the opposition.
So let's briefly acknowledge the fact that an Englishman is speaking at the Northern Irish Assembly about the lack of representation and the powerlessness in voting. I think I'm preaching to the choir a little bit, but it's a good question. Why vote? I mean, what is voting meant to do? It's meant to be your voice in this democracy. It's meant to be truly how you are meant to voice everything that you want. But is that truly how it works? Is that truly what it is? Is it not just an endorsement of a system which, as I'm sure we can all agree, does not represent every one of our interests? Because that is what voting is in reality. It's a race to the bottom. A race to see which is the fewest principles that you can give up on. It is an endorsement of a rule by which we are continually ignored and downtrodden by a government which acts with impunity, fearing the one day in every 5 years where not everyone's vote counts. What does voting actually do outside of elections? Let's just start with that, because we do have, in effect, a regularly elected dictatorship. Outside of elections, your voice only counts for petitions. Put your hands up if you've ever signed one of those government petitions before. I've signed quite a few, including one to insert a pineapple up Nigel Farage, but none of them went anywhere. The top 3 petitions in the United Kingdom, one in 2024, 3 million signatures asking for a general election based on Labour's poor performance. Nothing happened. 2016, 4.2 million signatures pled for a second referendum. Nothing happened. In 2019, a petition reached 10% of the United Kingdom's population. 6 million people asking to rejoin the EU. Nothing happened.
On that point, something did happen. That was debated in Parliament when 1 million signatures are hit. It's debated. That is democracy. It counts.
Can't help but notice nothing happened as a result of that. What does that happen every single time that there's a debate in Parliament? Nothing happens. Because there is no... I think that's barracking, but there's no actual result of this, because there is no actual reason for the vested interests to commit to change. There's a massive disproportionality in voting as well. In 2017, Labour received 12.9 million votes, yet received 232 seats. In 2024, Labour received 3 million votes less and received 200 more seats. Your vote does not matter. Your constituency matters, sure, but you are easily drowned out within that constituency. I live in York Central. That is my constituency. That is a Labour and Co-op safe seat since its establishment in 2005. My vote is not worth anything in that situation. I have voted twice in that area. Nothing has changed. It is always going to be a Labour safe seat. It always will be. And Rachel Maskell, God bless her, I do love her as an MP, she doesn't do anything. She does the bare minimum every time. Of those who are in power, they're not paid to listen. Because why would they? It is their job to pretend. I'm sure everyone's got an MP who oh so conveniently misses certain emails and certain phone calls just so they don't have to do them. Because it's not in their interest. It's in the interest of MPs and Prime Ministers to play dress up, to pretend like they're going to do something. I mean, every November we see politicians in this country wearing the iconography of ending war in the form of a poppy, and then later that week voting to send weapons to a genocidal regime. How many times have you seen that happen? It's all pageantry, a Punch and Judy show where the government is Judy and we're all getting punched in the face. Even when you do vote to change it, the establishment is actively designed to oppose that change. Let's just take, for example, what's going on in New York right now. Zoran Mamdani just won the Democratic mayoral candidacy for mayor of New York. And the entire way, he has been stabbed in the back by his own party, by the government, which is meant to represent the will of the people, that now oppose the will of the people.
On that point?
Sure.
Doesn't Zoran Mamdani actually represent quite far left politics, which bring into disrepute the rest of the Democrat Party? So isn't it in their interest to prevent him from winning primary elections?
Sorry, it's in the Democratic Party's interest to oppose what 70% of New Yorkers have already voted for. I just want to get that in writing, yeah?
70% Democratic.
Within the party have voted for in New York, for mayor. They have chosen this guy, and the Democratic Party have gone, no, we know better than you. That's not democracy. That's oligarchy. I mean, the mechanisms of this cesspit are designed to never allow for change. Change is impossible through this system. We do see populists very often using malicious and mendacious rhetoric to try to deceive the populace into voting for them. But every time they gain power, what do? Nothing. Remember when Trump drained the swamp? No, because he didn't want to. It made him richer. Remember when Brexit solved immigration forever? No, because it wasn't designed to. These great deceptions of the electorate are designed to enrich the vested interests and vested powers of those who feed off the electorate. Not delivering them anything, but just selling them a lie. These con men, these liars, prey on our buying into this system, this broken system. Only 43% of voters in this country care about broken political promises. 25% say it's expected. That is the consequences of us being deceived by liars and grifters every single day. We don't expect our politics, to be honest. We don't expect anything because we expect to just get, and excuse my French, shafted by the worst politics in the Western world. The political posturing that we see non-stop is politicians dedicating themselves to grandstanding. These pretentious speeches do nothing but feed the egos of men with delusions of grandeur, such as myself. So it just leads to the question, can any part of our democracy actually be considered representative? It's just a race to the bottom, as I said. Raise your hand. Have you voted for a party that has represented every single one of your interests before, or have you had to give up on one? Put your hand up if you've never given up on any of your principles to vote. Wow. One person. I know for a fact that policy does not matter anymore because that is no longer the point of politics. It is the point of politics to be lied to. 76% of Reform supporters today cannot name a single policy. Only the goal of stopping the boats, but not a single answer of how they might do that. The electorate of this country know that the system is broken and know that voting will not do a thing to change it. Even the suffragettes that were just brought up by the previous speech, they gained the right to vote, not through asking their MP, but through bombing places. Do we get out of our democracy anything other than ignored? Do we get used as fodder for the powerful and corrupt? Absolutely. Because we're not meant to be the ones profiting. Our democracy is not for us. Don't play a role in this pantomime. Don't endorse this. Don't condone this. Don't vote.
Speech. Just as a disclaimer to our speakers, given that we are in the Parliament buildings, I think it's fine to use parliamentary language, or else you will be fined 3/4 if otherwise. But nevertheless, I now call second on the proposition, Luke to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Education Councillor, and everyone attending here in this beautiful Parliament building where elected representatives represent our values and needs. Elected representatives should never forget they owe their jobs to us, we the people who vote them in. I'm sure Peter will agree with me that whether he likes it or not, he relies on his constituents. He would be nowhere without their votes. For today's debate, I will outline the history of voting rights, why it's important to preserve this and utilise it. Obviously, Peter highlighted greatly in Jack Steele's speech, I should probably say, the importance of voting. But then Ash will later highlight the dangers of abstentionism, and Tom's going to further discuss the fight that many people have had in order to gain the right to vote. Now, voting is a fundamental birthright. It has been a vital part of the political system and democracy since democracy was founded back in ancient Greece. There is a simple principle: we should choose who rules us. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose influential work, The Social Contract, emphasised the will of the people and the concept that the government and the people are bound to each other. I quote, "The very right to vote imposes on me the duty to instruct myself in public affairs." My friends, are we going to turn down this duty passed on to us because we don't like some of the parties? Thomas Hobbes stated that individuals have the right to vote and should exercise their right in order to consent to a form of government and leave the war and state of nature. And the great leader of the American civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King, framed the right to vote as part of the eternal moral issue of the civil rights movement. Now, the opposition are very smart people, but do they really want to disagree with some of the greatest minds in history?
On the point.
Go ahead.
You talked a lot about Martin Luther King there. Maybe you can illuminate how he achieved his aims. I don't think he was sitting casting his ballot quite a lot. He was on the marches, Montgomery. Like, surely, his means, maybe we should employ them and see more effective change, no?
Well, I'm saying, obviously, other methods can be applied, but ultimately it's voting that gives him the power. He could have made those protests all he wanted, but until there was voting rights, black people didn't necessarily have the same power. They were just fighting for it. Now, voting is the most important part of democracy. There is no democracy without voting. In fact, many societies, the right to vote is stripped away. This is in the form of oligarchy, like in Afghanistan, where the Taliban have dissolved political parties, and North Korea, where Kim Jong-un is not elected by his people. These two countries consistently have the lowest human rights indexes and occupied the bottom two spaces last year. I say to the opposition, go to any of these places, look at the people that are being abused, and tell them that voting doesn't matter. Now, also, if we look at places where voting is compulsory, not now, Hugh, such as Australia, where our great friend Noah Ralphs is, and Belgium, these have higher voting turnout than both the UK and US, and they also have the highest human rights indexes. They were in the top 10 last year. Not now, James. I'm trying to get through this, please. Coincidence? I think not. Now, addressing voting as a birthright and a law leads to higher participation and a better country. Put it simply, the more people vote, the better the country is. I'm willing to listen to my colleagues opposite me, but maybe not in a POI, maybe later on. And why we shouldn't vote. But I might also present them with some points to dissect. Abstentionism, which Ash will touch on later on, leads to an inaccurate representation of the will of the people. You may be a left-winger who believes in reforming Stormont to make it more democratic and a basic living wage. You didn't vote so the status quo continues. Abstention is the ploy of the establishment. It creates unrepresentative governments and a weaker democracy. Look at Portugal. Portugal, there was a 40% turnout for the last presidential election, and the country is heavily in debt. So not voting doesn't work out for them. This particular political system has seen various collapses in the Good Friday Agreement, but democracy has always been imperfect. We shouldn't throw the towel in just because we don't like everything that happens. Think of the many social groups, which obviously I've touched on, who had to fight for so long to get the vote. The suffragettes, obviously Hugh mentioned them earlier on, they campaigned for 15 years and to face government opposition before some women were given the rights to vote. For the women in the audience, siding with the opposition might as well be stating that the cause of the suffragette movement, which some died for and which you benefited, was not worth it. Sorry if I'm mansplaining, I don't really know what mansplaining really is. Catholics in the room, there's not really many, and Hugh's one of them, suggested that we might as well, if you're suggesting that Catholics should not vote, you're slapping Daniel O'Connell in the face. Or even worse, you're disregarding the legacy of the People's Democracy and the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, who fought so hard for the Stormont government to introduce one man, one vote and to end gerrymandering in places like Derry. These groups did not suffer years of oppression and abuse for you to say you can't be bothered to vote because you don't like the parties and the candidates. Campaigning for voting rights is the key to building democracy. We should not tarnish the legacy of those many brave men and women who died for the right to vote by not partaking in the fruits of their labour. This may be a trigger word for some people, obviously. I'm aware now everyone likes Labour. Speaking of Labour, actually, I'm going to do something very controversial and actually agree with Labour. And yes, I'm aware not many of you want to speak to me later on tonight. The UK's government's recent election bill fixes many of the issues with voting over the last couple of years. I forgot my driving licence. It's on your phone. I forgot to register to vote. You're automatically registered. You forgot your passport, use your bank card. Most importantly, 16 and 17-year-olds can now vote. By saying that we shouldn't vote, you're basically telling them, you're setting a precedent for these newly enfranchised voters. It's not worth availing of the right that many groups have fought for, including Politics in Action. Just going to give a shout out to them, obviously. Do not let this seismic step in voting rights go to waste by voting for the opposition. And the opposition may argue that in the UK and USA that voting is ineffective as both parties are basically the same. That is not true in either. There are many differences between Labour and Conservatives, even if Keir Starmer is obviously trying to make them now the one party. And even just if we look at the Democrats and Republicans, if we look at the Republicans, obviously they're trying to use ICE as basically a paramilitary to round up people at Home Depots and deport them. And they want to give tax cuts to the rich, and they want to support an orange man as president who likes to take trips to his buddy's cool island. The Democrats don't want that. Another point the opposition may make is your individual vote doesn't matter. We're not saying one vote alone will make a momentous difference to an election result, but our argument is that the power of the collective vote can make a difference. In fact, you know what? I'm going to take that back. Yes, one vote can actually make a difference. If we take a look at the 2000 US presidential election, Al Gore lost the state of Florida by only 537 votes, and that forever changed the course of US foreign policy. And if we look at the seat of Fermanagh and South Tyrone, in 2019, Michelle Gurnu beat Tom Ayad by a mere 57 votes. Not 5, as Peter suggested. 57. Still a small margin. Sometimes elections go right down the wire, which shows how important it really is, as only a few votes can turn tide of election results. In conclusion, let us never disregard the importance of voting. Prove the importance of voting by voting for the proposition. And just the opposition, if you want to ask me questions, try and get that in like a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke, for that very fine speech. I will now welcome Nihal to the podium, please.
Close your eyes and picture this. A ship, midnight, waves the size of mountains crashing down. Deck is chaos, sailors shouting, ropes snapping apart, thunder tearing the sky down. The captain's compass, it's gone. The map, it's soaked. The storm doesn't care. It just keeps roaring. The crew panics. What do we do? Someone screams. Let's vote. And the shouts. So they gather, rain pouring down, lighting, flashing, and they vote. Half say turn left, the other half say turn right. And by the time, as the opposition suggests, they vote, they count, they deliberate, they negotiate, and they argue, the ship has already sunk. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what blind democracy, that is what blind voting looks like. When participation replaces purpose, when noise replaces navigation, when we make mistake the act of voting as the art of thinking. The ship of society doesn't sail forward, it simply sinks faster. So today, when this House proudly declares we should vote, I and my team on the opposition rise to ask a simple question which perhaps everybody in the audience and everybody in this House must ask. Should we vote just because we can? Because if every hand is raised but no mind is awake, that's not democracy. In 1959, the Congo's first post-colonial election saw a turnout of 90% of the population. Isn't that great? But the majority of them couldn't even identify the party's policies. They couldn't read the ballot papers. They voted for symbols, a chicken, a fish, and a star, without knowing what the policy stood for. The result? A democracy that collapsed into dictatorship within a year. They voted, but they did not choose. Yes, voting is power, as the proposition claims, but in the wrong hands, uninformed, emotional, easily manipulated, it is also a weapon turned inward. Because when people act out of anger, ignorance, or fear, democracy becomes a game of chance, not change. A study conducted by the MIT in 2020 found that 61% of voters, 61% of educated voters couldn't identify a single policy of their chosen party. And we call that participation? No, that's mass delusion wrapped in civic pride. And now the opposition tries to claim a rosy picture. They'll say, if you don't vote, you can't complain. But I say, if you don't understand who you're voting for, you are the complaint. Let me tell you another story. After years of poverty, shame, and empty promises, a broken nation finally found a man who spoke like thunder and delivered promises which promised hope, pride, and revenge. They cheered, they trusted this man, and they voted for him. Does it ring a bell? The Weimar Republic, Adolf Hitler, the first proposition speaker mentioned Hitler. Ironically, Adolf Hitler used the power of voting to come in power. And we know what he did.
On that point,
ladies and gentlemen, that is not just a war story. That is a warning. When people act without understanding, when emotion replaces information, when noise drowns out of knowledge, disaster follows. And that right there is why I rise today to oppose this motion that this House should vote. I tell the opposition to go and ask the people of Zimbabwe how it feels when someone promises you change, when someone promises you hope, opportunity, better living, future standards, and economic stability. Yet the result for voting is the same every time. Go and ask the people of North Korea how exciting and interesting it is to vote for the same man every single time. Ask the people of China, where election day is just a national game of guess who, with the same face in every single card. And ask the people of Afghanistan, where voting is less about picking a leader and more about proving you can hold a pencil under supervision. Democracy, when blinded by emotion, doesn't protect truth. It crucifies it. Remember Athens, the world's first democracy. It voted to kill Socrates, not a tyrant, not a dictator. And modern history is no kind either. Brexit 2016, a single vote divided a nation, crashed currencies, and according to the UK Office for Budget Responsibility, it cost the UK economy nearly 4% of its GDP. Sometimes the problem isn't that people don't vote. The problem is that people vote without knowing what they are breaking. Voting changes leaders, not systems. It changes faces, not foundations. Because after every election, what happens? The poor remain poor. The headlines change, the hunger doesn't.
On that point.
And if voting really gave us power, politicians would be the ones standing in our line for approval and not the other way around. The ETM barometer in the 2024 report suggests that 66% of its citizens no longer trust their governments. And yet, every few years, we queue, we cheer, we post selfies with inked fingers as if we have somehow changed and disinfected that system. The world is storming now with misinformation. Ladies and gentlemen, remember that ship in the storm. The crew shouted, they participated, they voted exactly how the opposition wants it today. But they had no compass, they had no understanding, and their ship still sank. Today, our world is that ship. Waves of misinformation, storms of division, lightning strikes of populism. The answer to that is not to shout vote. The answer to that is not to shout make elections great again. The answer is to ask why deeper. Because democracy was never about counting people's votes. It was about making people count. And hence, I beg the audience and this house to vote and to stand for the opposition. Because these days, voting has become like picking Wi-Fi networks. The same weak signal with different names. So before you rush the polls, thinking you're changing the world, remember you're reloading the same glitchy system. And lastly, I would like to ask, would you let a man who doesn't know the difference between poison and penicillin prescribe you medicine? Would you let a man who says Tylenol is linked with autism be your vote? Thank you very much.
Thank you all for that very fine speech. I would now like to invite third and opposition making her maiden speech, Ash, to the podium, please.
The ballot is stronger than the bullet. Now, I thought I'd start this speech with a bit of Abraham Lincoln, because despite the word democracy only appearing like 137 times in all of his writings, Lincoln made it clear that for a government to be representative of its people, it needed to derive its powers from the consent of the governed. And it is through citizens casting their ballot and exercising their right to vote that consent becomes power. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ashyka, and I'm honored to be here today in this beautiful and historic Stormont estate, giving my maiden speech as third speaker of the side proposition. Before I begin, a few rebuttals. An audience member challenged, what happens if you vote for someone that doesn't carry out what you want? Much more than if you chose to not vote at all. The first speaker, Hugh, on the opposition, contended that alternatives to voting will never represent your interest, but at least when you vote, sometimes it will. How does not voting actually help with the issues raised by the first speaker? We can enact petitions and vote too. It's not one or the other. Hugh stated that voting is the fewest principles to give up on. In reality, it is the most principles to agree on. I suppose what the speaker previous to me would prefer for us to either jump ship or blindly follow a dictator captain. I prefer not to. I prefer to vote. I want to clarify that this motion does not call for this House to always cast a vote, but that this House would vote now. In this speech, I will be explaining why we would, what makes the stakes so high today, and how the political decisions we make directly impact us all. I also want to address issues with abstention, why staying silent doesn't work, and finally I'll end with highlighting the crucial role of collective responsibility. To understand why voting should matter to us, now more than ever, let's start with when it didn't matter to us and the catastrophic consequences of that inaction. Let's start with Brexit. Putting aside the arguments for staying or remaining, I'm more interested in another question. Was the result of that referendum representative of the people? I mean, being representative is the whole point of holding a referendum, right? Because you're asking people to vote directly on policy and not through representative. Well, the numbers say no. Leave won by a razor-thin 3.8% margin, just 1.3 million votes, but 12.9 million people did not vote. And most of them would have voted to remain. In fact, according to the first post-referendum poll by BBC Newsnight, those who abstained from voting were Remain supporters by a ratio of 2 to 1.
Do you know what?
Yeah.
But it is their right to abstain from voting. I mean, they have that right just as well as they can vote.
What I'm trying to illustrate with this point is that when citizens fail to vote, whether by choice or circumstance, the outcome does not reflect the true will of the electorate. If everyone had voted that fateful June, we would have had a Remain rather than a Brexit, although it's not as catchy, so maybe it worked out for the best. The consequences of abstention are not abstract. I mean, it led to widespread government instability, like not only on Downing Street, but within this very building, this very Stormont. Disputes over post-Brexit arrangements caused the executive to collapse for longer than it was working since the Brexit vote. 5 out of the last 8 years, Stormont simply stopped functioning. Budgets for health, education, and housing are stalled. That's what happens when representation fails, when our votes and our voices aren't part of the process. Even if you believe that Brexit was objectively the better choice in the long term, how could it have been the right choice for the people if it wasn't truly made by the people? Whether you voted Leave or Remain, the point is this. A decision only reflects the people if the people actually take part. The 12.9 million individuals that stayed silent didn't make a neutral choice. They handed their power, their consent, to others that had interests opposed to their own. And can we really afford another instance of this? The stakes today are just as high, if not higher. We're facing more crises than we can count. An NHS that is in crisis, the cost of living crisis, the climate crisis. But here's the thing. None of these issues can be solved if people stop showing up. Because when citizens choose not to vote, it doesn't punish the politicians, it protects them. Abstention doesn't send a message of protest, it sends a message of permission. It tells those in talent, it tells those that in power that they can keep doing what they're doing unchecked and unchallenged. As our first speaker, Peter Martin, argued, choosing not to vote isn't neutrality, it's surrender. It hands over your voice to someone else, someone who may not share your values, your struggles, or your hope for the future. And if you want the numbers to prove it, voter turnout has been declining since 1997. And has anything really changed? The opposition can try to frame abstention as a way of saying, I don't support any of them. But in reality, politicians don't see a blank ballot box as a challenge, they see it as compliance. When voter turnout drops, accountability drops with it. Because if fewer people vote, those in power only need to answer to the few who do. This is why collective responsibility is vital to a healthy democracy, because votes are like currency for politicians. And like the actual currency, the less money on the table, the less of a reason to listen. So when you chose not to vote, you put the burden on others to spend your political currency for you, and that may be against your own interests. Think of it like an economy. If only a few invest, the system favors them, not the majority. But when everyone contributes their share, it becomes stronger, more balanced, and more responsive. For example, a surge in voter turnout in the 2017 snap general election prevented the Conservatives from winning a majority and produced a hung parliament. This single act of participation forced political compromises and reshaped policy decisions. Of course, no system is perfect. A single vote may not always sway an election, and politicians can still act against public interest. But even so, when everyone participates, power is distributed more fairly, leaders are held accountable, and policies better reflect the needs and values of the community as a whole. In contrast, when people abstain, they leave the system to a few voices, weakening accountability and skewing outcomes.
On that point.
Democracy thrives when we all act together. I'll take your POI.
Okay, how about the fact that when voter turnout reduces, we do see a swing in popularity for smaller parties, such as the Greens and Lib Dems, who have been actively capitalising on reduced voters?
Is it okay if I ask him to clarify his point or no? Can you just clarify your point really quickly? Okay. Actually, it's okay. I'll let my other speaker take it. I just wanted to summarize by saying, if we want better leadership, more transparency, or genuine change, the answer isn't to withdraw, it's to engage. The ballot box is not the end of accountability, it's where it begins. So this House would vote, and so should you. Vote in your elections and vote for the proposition. Thank you.
very fine speech. I would now like to call third the proposition, James.
Malgat, Uachtaran, Akarja, fellow members of council, ladies and gentlemen. I have absolutely no reservation standing before you all here today in this fine and grandiose chamber in telling you that our system of politics and governance is a sham and must be rejected. I don't care about democracy. I mean, I'm not going to stand up here and lecture you on democracy and why it's so great. That's absolutely not why we're here today. But James, that's anti-democratic and goes against our concept of liberty. My dear friends, I do not care. Can anyone in this room really stand up and say that they think their puny and insignificant ballot will really change tides or force society to embark upon a new journey towards prosperity and all that is good? I mean, really? We have our idealists here to my right, so young and naive. You know, I was once like them also. I thought that if we just banded together and did our democratic duty, we could actually make things work. No, thank you. We could fight for a better future, and that the politicians and government who represent us and work for us would make things okay.
On that point.
No. And then I turned 15 and I read Machiavelli. I mean, let's strip this debate to its most fundamental premise, and I truly want you all to follow closely. This fine and esteemed proposition, which includes Peter, who has just sat down, I wants all of you to think that the process of voting in politicians and bureaucratic governments actually works for you. That when you make the journey to the polling station and do your democratic duty of electing party hacks, no offence, Peter, the equivalent of hired guns, it is actually you who shoot yourself in the foot. Can anyone really look around Northern Ireland or anywhere else and think that all is fair, that children with special needs can't get places in school, that patients can't get surgery due to high waiting lists? The fact is, half the time that I've been alive, this Parliament building hasn't even been working. I mean, it hasn't actually worked for 40% of the time since 1998. How the hell are we supposed to vote when the thing's not even working? Sorry, but I hope hell's not that bad as a curse word. Yes, look, I'll take.
So also you're saying it's crashed many times, but what we were arguing is that yes, Roxy's perfect, but we still have to vote for the people who will make it perfect, or make it better at least. So your point being?
Well, unfortunately, I don't see those people here right now. You know, no offence, Peter. Again, this is terrible. This is like a Peter hate fest. Sorry. It's a fair point. Look, it really is. Although, I must confess, I did read the Belfast Telegraph this morning in which your party actually railed against Stormont. Your own party said that Stormont isn't working. I would be inclined to actually agree with that point. I think of the great philosophy actually of Plato. By the way, I'd all recommend you to read. In his critique of democracy, he put it quite simply like this, and it actually echoes my good friend's point that imagine we were all on a ship that is in need of dire navigation and someone to sail it. Obviously, no one has a clue how to sail that ship. Of course, anyone in this room does sailing, but we'll ignore that fact if you do. Would it be competent to allow everyone in this dilemma to have an equal say in sailing the ship, despite no one actually having a clue how to operate such a vessel? No, thank you. Indeed, but my friends, this is what we do with our own nation and government. I mean, democracy allows for everyone to have their equal say, to have the same vote as everyone else. Now, they might have absolutely no clue about politics. They might even have maligned intentions and want to see the nation fail. However, this fantastic pluralist model, which everyone pretends is so great, actually isn't the best, because it allows everyone to have the same singular vote as everyone else, even if people have maligned actions. It just doesn't make sense. I also think of the commentary of Socrates on democracy, imagining an election between that of a doctor and that of an owner of a sweet shop. The man with the sugary luxuries would say to his rival, How can you support this man? He prescribes such harsh practices. He tells you to fast from food and drink and attempt surgery that can often lead to your fatal demise. He does not feed you like I, treating you to such feasts and delicious foods that make you feel good and that you like. Socrates asked us to consider our response. Do you think the doctor would be able to reply effectively? Sure, the doctor does what he thinks he is good for the health of us, but in the midst of political turmoil or polarised elections, are people really going to elect the one that they perceive to be giving them a harder time? Or will the people elect the sweet shop owner who promises comfort and life like living in a house made of chocolate? The reality is people vote for who they like, not for who they need. I mean, there's a quote from Winston Churchill which goes along the lines of democracy is the worst form of government aside from all those that have been tried, which is a nice quote. However, I must confess, sorry Matthew, I prefer another quote from the Bulldog himself, in which he said, the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. Now, I do not hold that quote applies to anyone in this room. Of course not. We're all intelligent and up to date on current affairs, although for some people that I know the conversation would only need to take 2 minutes. I won't say any names. The political reality is this. It was said that voting is a birthright. Who gave us that right? The Bible doesn't say we all have a right to vote. It is man-made institutions that say we have the right to vote. The very fact is, where has voting got in this country? It was said by the proposition, that we have to deal with a cost of living crisis and all these other crises. But we've been voting for the last 60 years, and none of these things have gone away. In fact, some would say some of the parties that have been voted in have made things worse. The very fact is, democracy is not going to save us. Voting is not going to save us. And I put the responsibility on my dear friend Luke to give us the alternative to which we will seek and support. And I thank you all for listening here to me today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James, for that very fine speech. I would now like to invite those for the proposition and giving his maiden speech at the top.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, here in this amazing place, the voice of the people knocks on the door. It's magical. People, no matter your religion, your race, your sexuality, your gender, go to the ballot box to make their voices heard. And it's a beautiful thing. Today we've heard many arguments from our opposition, and I'd like to see how they did. What did the opposition need to prove today? They needed to prove that, firstly, voting is detrimental to society and to the economy, and they needed to prove that voting is detrimental to you personally. And frankly, they didn't do a very good job, making the bizarre argument that we should get rid of democracy and that's the solution. They suggested that things are bad, things are terrible. The solution to that isn't by not voting. Nothing's going to happen if you don't vote. The solution to that, please.
Nothing happens now.
That's not true, though. That's not true. Things do happen, and solutions are found. They might be slow. They might be not as entertaining for the media, but things do happen. No, thank you. The solution to our problems is to vote. If your trains run late, vote. If you're not happy with what we're doing internationally, vote. If you're not happy with the state of the economy, vote. Because, please.
We did all that last year, and what we got was the trains were cut, the budget was slashed. We got the abandonment of services, we didn't get the improvement of them.
You might think that things are bad now. But frankly, they could be a lot worse. Now, I'm going to get to a very important point, which is that politics and democracy is about compromise. Politics and democracy is about finding the least worst choice. Now, I'm going to speak for Britain because I don't know much about Northern Irish politics, but our choices aren't that bad. The new so-called Your Party, the leaders might not be able to figure out whose party it actually is, but it's still not. The overall parties aren't that bad. The Lib Dems, the extent of their beliefs and convictions might be which water slide is Ed Davies' favourite, but overall, the parties and the candidates aren't awful, and frankly, they don't meet the requirement for you to say, I can't choose the least worst choice. They're not... Then, please.
It's not a matter of picking the least worst choice. It's denying the buying into a system that you don't agree with.
Are you suggesting that you don't agree with the system of democracy, the system of people going to the ballot box and choosing their own future?
Straw man.
Well, it's not a straw man, it's what you said. In fact, one of the speakers said that, voting is bad because people in Weimar Germany voted for Hitler. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if more people voted and didn't step on the sidelines and actually didn't vote for Hitler? I think that's an argument for more voting. I think more people should have voted against Hitler. But frankly, exactly, yeah, please.
Well, people are still voting, and tens of millions did vote for Hitler, and perhaps if more people had voted, then they would have also voted for Hitler.
So you're suggesting if more people voted, they might have voted for Hitler. I mean, these are hypotheticals we won't go into too much. But what you can say is that in Weimar Germany, a lot of people stayed on the sidelines because they were scared. If more people voted, if there was a higher turnout, perhaps the result would have been different. Now, I'm not saying it necessarily would have been, but I'm suggesting that the result could have been different. The problem of dictators being voted into power and then not giving up the power isn't an argument against democracy or voting. It's an argument for more voting, so you prevent these things from happening. And I'd like to briefly cover why your vote matters, because we've got a lot from this side of the House basically suggesting that we as individuals, what can we possibly do to make change, because change isn't happening? Well, I would remind them of the tiny margins in just the general election in 2024. Hendon, the MP lost by 15 votes. Poole, 18 votes. That's a literific society. If we move to these places, we can change the result. And, you could say, these affected a very small amount of seats. They don't actually affect legislation. I might remind the opposition that the assisted dying bill passed by 23 votes. I might also remind that Cooper Letwin's bill to avoid a no-deal Brexit passed third reading by 1 vote. So every single vote matters. Democracy and voting is not just about the future, but it's about establishing your rights and maintaining these rights that people fought so hard for. I frankly think that it's a spit in the face to the people who died for democracy to just basically say, look, I don't want my right to vote. I think everyone deserves a voice. Voting is community. Voting is freedom. Voting is the power of the people. Thank you very much.
Speech. I would now like to call to close the debate and close the opposition. Look to the podium.
Whose phone is this, actually? Just on a... Oh, right, okay.
Friends, today the proposition has brought us emotions so full of hope and life, so full of optimism and idealism, yet so devoid of truth and logic. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we must head out against this motion and in turn dispel a few falsehoods and also set out a comprehensive plan, or at the very least the beginnings of it, to understand how we can move forward without the need for this frivolous bureaucracy and the need to vote like chickens pecking at the ground for seed. My friends, as much as I would wish to join in the proposition and sing Kumbaya, let's all go and vote, in truth I can't let it. My conscience won't let me because my logic tells me that it is wrong. My friends, so many have voted and nothing has changed. So many continue to vote and yet nothing has changed. Stagnation is the only symptom of liberal democracy. Stagnation is the only symptom of voting. Let's move on to the first point, ladies and gentlemen, the systematic faults of our system. So let's begin with the good old things are going to get better, Mr. Tony Blair. Tony Blair, in his first mandate, from 1997 to 2004, would you like to know how many votes he lost? 0. Would you like to know how many seats he had? Over 300. Would you like to know the portion of the vote? Just over 40. My friends, what we've stumbled upon here is the idea of the elective dictatorship, where we're dictated to not by the majority, not even by most of the people in this room, but by the plurality, those who are organised enough to tell us what to do, and we have to listen to them. Now, forgive me, Peter, I was going to talk to a ghost here, but now I'll address you. Peter, you stand sort of saying, oh yes, we must simply vote for the sake of voting. We must vote again and again and again until someone enacts our policies, but Peter, look around you. We've come into this chamber, and as James has rightly said, so many of our mandates for this government, we tell them, go on and make legislation for us, go on and make legislation for us. And they take about 6 months of it, and then they've decided, it's not for me. I'm a part-timer. That's exactly what's happened here. Our mandate wasn't part-time, and yet our vote for that mandate was completely invalidated because they felt like there was some injustice they needed to do, which would eschew our mandate, which would pervert our vote into something we never asked it to be. And another thing, ladies and gentlemen, is that if we're going to even abandon the idea of Northern Ireland, let's look at the first past the post system. It is a corrupt bargain. The plurality of people, I'll give you an example. I worked this out because I had an argument with a Sinn Féin councillor. For an MP seat, they would need maybe 35% of the vote. If it was all split evenly, forgive me, I did fail maths, they need about 35% of the vote if it was all split evenly between PBP, Alliance, stuff like that. And the fact of the matter is then that we've essentially got 70 or 65% of the people who have voted for an MP, who have voted for representation, and yet no one gets it because that's the dictatorship of the plurality. Yes?
We're not saying that this model is, damn it, I need to rephrase, this debate is not about this House would change voting system, we just say we would vote.
Yeah, well,
so you
actually,
might have complaints with the voting system, but we're still saying it's important to vote.
So we may as well compound upon a fracture in the foundations because we just have to, guys. That's like me saying, God, I need to check my door's locked even though it's completely blown apart because I just have to check. It's for the sake of checking. Let and gentlemen, there are fundamental issues with the idea of voting in general. No, thank you. First of all, let me allow myself to be infected with the blind optimism of the proposition, and let me allow myself to slap my blindfold on. Let me get my pen and paper in hand and go, right, show me who to vote for. Who do I vote for? Sinn Féin?
On that point?
Yeah. He has some feelings about Sinn Féin, I think, but no thank you. Sinn Féin and the DUP, both bloated organisations that are determined to essentially preside over power. Peter, you can still shout out if you want. But they are bloated organisations that are determined to preside over this House rather than actually make things better for people. Alliance, and forgive me, I am a member, to my great dismay. This is going to hurt, but it's ineffective, and it's all a load of kumbaya. Let's work together, guys. It's never worked. My friend, look, I don't like the other parties. You've said there, just because you don't like the parties, you have to vote. It's not that I don't like the parties. The parties we're talking about have had criminals as leaders, have had ineffective leaders, have had led to continuous government shutdowns. It's not that I don't like them. It's that I view them as base cancer. We must cut them out. There is no point in saying, well, I thought it was a bit mad that he spent £10 billion of my taxpayer money. Let me give me vote to someone else. Let's tear out the system root and stem. Yes, look.
Are you asking me if you're all right?
I think, you were.
Yeah.
Put your hand up.
But here's what you're saying. Oh, they elected, I presume you're referencing a former DUP leader. That's called bad apples. Like, that's bad apples. Every party has bad apples. But the
I agree with you that maybe it's a couple of bad apples, but listen, it seems we have a knack of finding bad apples at the top of the pile here in Northern Ireland. So let's get on to how we find an answer. Let's get on to what James suggested, how we build a democracy without it. Well, my friends, let's look back to the Agora. What if we had an advisory body filled with every citizen, maybe 50 citizens per street? Maybe we had one leader taken on a rota every street. Maybe they all go to an advisory body. Maybe that rota changes. No. Maybe that rota changes bit by bit, year by year, month on month. Is that my time over? Perfect. Thank you, guys. But it's month on month, week on week. We can change and take decisive action, still having representation, but not having to rely on such a frivolous and useless system as casting our little votes in the ballot. Now, another thing, ladies and gentlemen, that we must look at here. The Salt March, the Burn-Tullet March, indeed the Montgomery March, as I previously mentioned, all of these achieved some action. Was a vote cast in any one of them? You were circular in your logic. I found, look, that he needed the right to vote, to make the case, to make the right to vote. He didn't. He went out without needing to vote, without taking any sort of ballot paper with him. He marched, he protested, he showed to everyone what his goals were, what his desires were, and they took them and ran with them. The fact of the matter is he didn't need votes to do that. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the proposition is starry-eyed and bushy-tailed. They wield the candle of youth, of optimism unbridled. One can only hope that they do not take this candle out into the night of cold reality. Thank you all for your time. Reject this motion as you know it all makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke, for that very fine speech and a brilliant close to what has been an incredibly exciting display of debate. I think there's a thing called Godwin's Law, which is that the longer a conversation goes on for, the more likely Hitler is to be brought up. I think after how today's debate has went, I think it's apt to rename it Godkin's Law instead. But now we are on to our questions. So this is your chance to propose a question to either the proposition or the opposition on a point that they made or something you would wish that they would elaborate on. So, do we have any questions for the proposition, please? Yes, Mr. Spratt.
In regards to voting, you've hit on it before, you say things have changed, but what really has changed? We still have NHS waiting lists. We still have issues with schools being underfunded. If there was an alternative to voting, how would that... Sorry, let me rephrase that. What else bar voting can we do to speak up and make these changes come about?
Would someone from the proposition like to respond?
Do you want me to go ahead? Well, obviously, mentioned earlier on, obviously Luke touched on there when I was saying about Martin Luther King, and yes, they protested to get the vote. But what I was saying, actually, was that they protested for the right to vote, because ultimately protesting is good, but voting is what makes a change. So yes, you can protest and say we need to cut down NHS waiting lists, but what actually going to mean, they're not afraid of you going outside and voting placards. They're afraid that you will take that action and put it into votes. Right. So just to rephrase, I feel like I'm responding to two different questions here, but yeah, just to rephrase, if we are about alternative voting, protesting is nice, and yes, it's important to get votes, but ultimately what people are worried about is that those protesters are actually going to be voters, and their position is gone.
Would someone from the opposition like to respond?
Well, I mean, if we're going to go down that line, then really what did the American government have to fear by Martin Luther King's marches? At the end of the day, they didn't have much of a right to vote for anything. What are we doing here? At the end of the day, the fact of the matter is, those marches they didn't fear them because, these people might vote against us now. They feared them because they achieved widespread public attention. They stirred up feelings across the country. It provoked public opinion, not public votes, but public sentiment of animosity toward the government. What we're talking about here, and I'll get onto your question in a second, Mr. Spratt, but what we're talking about here is that essentially protest has worked far more effectively than simply people sitting cap in hand at the ballot box going, please give us your votes, we need to make change here. The Montgomery March is a perfect example. The Burn Tullet March here is a perfect example. We've seen people take decisive action and they're not translating it into votes. The Northern Ireland Parliament had no reason to fear the Burn Tullet March because they couldn't translate into a comprehensive amount of votes. The fact of the matter remains, they still feared them. So when you ask what the alternative is, I think it is at least a modicum of protesting. I also think it needs to be worked on with a system of advisory chambers, whether that's street by street, whether that's postcode by postcode. I know the BT9 one will be very, very strange, but the fact of the matter is there would be a way to streamline things without needing people to rely on vote after vote after vote when we know for a fact that it doesn't work.
Thank you. Do we have a question for the opposition, please? Yes.
Question. One is, you noticed a lot of the speakers talked about intelligence playing a factor in saying that there should be a certain level of education in which people need to vote. How would you classify that? Would you say they need to be politically inept to vote, or do they just need a general quota of education to hit? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, also more than one speaker mentioned that a lot of people vote, but not all of their decisions and wants get fulfilled. Are you saying that every person's needs should be fulfilled, even if they're extremist views, or they will cause issues further down the line?
Someone from the opposition care to respond, please?
Well, first of all, I will say the first point of intelligence to votes I strongly disagree with. I don't think that there should be any barrier to voting at all. I think even age of 16 to vote, I think that's a great thing. However, I do think that there should be some sort of civics education in the United Kingdom, which is woefully lacking. We really don't teach enough about how to spot political misguidance, to put it delicately. We don't know how to spot populists generally in the UK, whereas a lot of other countries do more extensively teach those sorts of things. And it should not be a barrier to education to not pass that, but it should be still a course in schools. And your second point, remind me?
Well, every person's wants and needs to be fulfilled.
Okay, well, with that was my point, I believe. The main issue comes from the fact that parties fundamentally will lie to their own people. For example, let's take Labour, who had 3 million signatures in a petition trying to call for a general election because they backstabbed their own promises. We've got the Tories, who have promised probably the sun at this point. Like, reform is still promising utter nonsense, and none of them can deliver. And that's the thing. It's not an issue of should you only vote for a party that represents every single last one of your opinions. It's we should have a way to curb parties from lying to the people.
No, sorry, back and forth. Thank you, Hugh. Someone from the proposition like to respond, please.
I'd just like to ask, what is the point of civics education if you don't want people to vote? And secondly, I love that there's no real world example given by the opposition on what this alternative is and how it actually exists in real life. Because I really would like to ask, where in the world is that like a real world example where people don't vote?
No back and forth, I'm afraid. Thank you, Ash. And finally, could we have an abstaining question? So just to clarify, this is a question that is put fairly to both the proposition and the opposition. So can we have an abstaining question, please? Mr. Spratt.
Can both sides suggest an example of what they're proposing, whether it be voting for democracy or not voting or whatever you're putting? State an example where it's completely effective.
Definitely. Benevolent dictatorship. Or Switzerland. They're saying Switzerland, I prefer monarchy. Well, you could have Switzerland, direct democracy, but then it is people voting, I suppose. I think about benevolent dictatorship, but a really nice guy, or woman, of course, at the top who meets the needs of the people and understands the people. None of this democracy stuff where there's so much fighting and stuff. Have just a person who understands, is caring, is loving, and makes him a dictator.
No back and forth, I'm afraid. Thank you, James. Can I have someone from the proposition like to respond, please?
Yeah, well, certainly there's been many examples. But what I would like to know is that in a democratic system where you get to vote, the transition of power is a lot nicer if you're not happy with what's going on. So I would note the United States in 2020 when Trump screwed up the pandemic awfully and people were dying, and the people went out to the ballot box and actually changed how things work. Here in the UK, the Tories forgot the common person, the Tories betrayed their voters. What happened? They got voted out with a different government. Now you could say that Labour is a worse government, is a downgrade, but what can we do again? We can vote in another party. So it's there's many examples. There's probably every election in history that's an example of this.
Thank you, Tom. So now it is time for the vote on speaker ability. So this is not whom you personally agree with the most. This is whom you thought spoke the best based on presentation, rhetoric, argument, teamwork and engagement. So can I have hands for the proposition, please?
No, they're just going to keep their hands down, don't worry.
Is that a hand?
Yeah, exactly.
Ari, is that a hand? No? No, okay. 4. And can I have votes for the opposition, please?
Just want to point this out how the votes have come through. You pointed out 2020 in the US as a peaceful transfer of power.
Okay, that is 9. Yep. And finally, votes... Order, please. Finally, votes to abstain on the motion, please. Okay, that is 3. Mr. Secretary, can I have the results from the motion and the debate?
With 4 votes to the proposition, 9 votes to the opposition, and 3 abstentions, the opposition carried the motion.
They didn't abstain.
Highlight the irony of the opposition.
No, but
We win ultimately.
just to raise an important point, though, I think all our speakers deserve a massive well done, especially considering we had 2 main speakers speak here today. So congratulations to everyone involved. I also think with where we are today and with this debate, with the 2 portraits highlighted where we have politicians from different backgrounds and parties in deep discussion with the very architecture of the Senate chamber that we're in today, and of course the excellent display and exhibition of chamber debating that we had from our speakers, that is a testament to debate, to discussion and to discourse. So I think that's something we can all be very proud of, and I'd like to thank everyone who was involved in this event today. I'd like to thank our events officer, Mr. James Tourish, and I'd like to thank our sponsor, Mr. Peter Martin, MLA. So thank you very much to everyone involved. And to highlight a final institution of debating, you could say, we'll all be heading to Lavery's after this debate. And finally, can I have all of our speakers join me at the front for photos, and I will hopefully see you all at Lavery's there. I call this meeting adjourned.
See, that just goes to prove, once again, best dressed wins.
Exactly, yeah. There you go. Well done. Ultimately, we did win because they voted